Hi everybody, this is Bob Iacchino from Path Trading Partners, along with my co-founder Mike Arnold. And this is a Path Chat educational update covering cryptocurrencies. Interesting little video that we're putting together for you today discussing why it is we chart the cryptocurrencies versus the US dollar as opposed to Ethereum versus Bitcoin or Ripple versus Bitcoin or Dash versus Bitcoin or Monero versus Bitcoin Cash or what we would in the FX markets call the cross pairs. So essentially, Mike's going to explain in detail why the technical side of it makes sense to do this, and he'll show you some examples. But from a fundamental perspective, you have to have a baseline on something to figure out whether it's gaining or losing value relative to the world that you live in. Mike's going to talk about relative value and relative strength. But what we're really looking at is Ethereum, is Bitcoin Cash moving up versus the assets that represent the world that you live in? Because at this point in the development of cryptocurrencies, that still is what matters. You can feel how you feel about fiat currencies. You could feel how you feel about precious metals. It should be backed in precious metals. Currently, they're not. You have to chart something against a baseline, even equities. If you just look at stocks, the vast majority of stocks in the world, even foreign stocks, are traded here in the US and are baseline to dollars. Now, there's obviously many stocks and many assets that are priced in the currency of the country they're domiciled in. But we are in the US. Mike and I are in the US. So in order to gauge the value up or down of any particular cryptocurrency, we have to do it versus the reserve currency of the country we're in. It just so happens the dollar is currently still the reserve currency of the world. Whether you agree with that ethically, morally, politically, doesn't really matter for the purpose of what we do here. What we're trying to decide is, should we buy Bitcoin? Should we buy Ethereum? Should we sell Monero? And at the end of the day, the only way for us to do that is versus a logical baseline, and that is against the US dollar at this stage. Down the road, if Bitcoin gets to the point where it's accepted enough to where it becomes the baseline to which you can even gauge the dollar versus Bitcoin as opposed to Bitcoin versus the dollar, that's a different story. But in the current world we live in, it's still a long way off. So you have to gauge it versus a baseline in order to decide which of the cryptocurrencies is strong, which one is weak, and relative to each other, which one you should be investing in or trading in. So that's really why we do it from a fundamental perspective. But let me turn it over to Mike because he's going to show you some examples of relative value between Ethereum and Bitcoin as the example as to why we do this. Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Bob. So, been getting quite a number of questions why we're doing the cryptocurrencies versus US dollar instead of versus Bitcoin. I will look at certain cryptos if I can only get feeds versus Bitcoin. When you're looking versus Bitcoin, it's Bitcoin makes it a lot more difficult to analyze because it's more a relative strength trade of the crypto versus Bitcoin. So what we do here at Path Trading Partners is we trade it more like we'd pair trade stocks, which is relative strength, which is we're going to want to be overweight versus underweight one. We're essentially long and short one, and we trade it versus different levels. And it gets a little more complex to explain, and the chart patterns don't work. Support and resistance works very well, but a lot of the other things don't work quite as well, and you don't have a lot of the traditional chart patterns, which for most people, it's easier for them to learn to trade the chart patterns. And you can judge it versus something like the US dollar, which is a much more stable. It does not have the same volatility, so you don't get massive distortions in the price comparisons. And if we're looking at all of them, Dash, Ethereum, IOTA, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin, we all have a common ground, so we can essentially see the relative strength because we're all comparing it to the reserve currency. Now, this could be done even though the euro is not a reserve currency. If I was in Europe, I'd probably be charting everything against the euro. Just for the sake, there's not as much volatility. It gives me that common baseline. Here's an example. We have Ethereum US dollar. This has come off its lows. We're into consolidation right here. I know my projected levels upside, and I know if we break down, especially below this trend line, where my next targets are to downside, and I see us really in this nice horizontal congestion pattern. If we switch over to it versus Bitcoin, it's a complete different picture. It was in a much longer horizontal pattern, but this is showing me, all right, which is relatively stronger. Right now, Bitcoin's actually a fair amount stronger than Ethereum. So it can be traded, but it's going to be traded versus key support and resistance levels. It's tougher to do some of the projections just because of the distortions, and you get some massive moves in Bitcoin, and you get a lot more bar overlap, and you don't get the key patterns. So if you're looking to chart it here, you can use some concepts with the rotation zones. They just don't hold up quite as well. It's very important that you look for key support and resistance levels, and then you have to look back and forth at the relative strength. See, this is sort of a horizontal channel with declining highs, so maybe we could call it a wedge even, but it's lower, lower, lower. Just the end of the clear path moves don't line up as well as if you are doing it against Bitcoin. So it's a lot tougher to explain to especially newer traders or people who aren't exposed to technical analysis as much, what to target, when to get in, when to get out, and then the whole relative strength aspect of adding and reducing one versus the other, and when we're going to be net sellers of Ethereum, when we're going to be net sellers of Bitcoin, and when we're going to be net buyers. It makes many things more complex. Maybe we'll get into that more in the future. Just want to show something else, switching back to Ethereum US dollar. Ethereum US dollar 4-hour chart, back on the 3rd. We had a double bottom start forming, completed on the low on the 4th, triggered on the 5th, pulled back the rotation zone, then hit the 1st and 2nd targets. Going into a advanced clear path move, really dual segment with a little pause in between, but you see how it reacted, pausing at the 1st target. Really nice traditional chart pattern that we use in currency trading, in futures trading, in stock trading. So you can see how that all played out. If we switch back to Ethereum versus Bitcoin and look at the same time period. So here's Ethereum Bitcoin 4-hour chart, looking at here, let me find the 3rd. The 3rd essentially starts right around here. There is no discernible chart pattern here. There's nothing. You got the rotation zone against it. It does trade into a clear path move. There would have been a trend line, but there's not the high probability double. You get a lot more overlap. You don't get the clean price action. There's a lot more back and forth, and it's really distorted. I mean, when this was triggering on the 5th to go long Ethereum, this was actually it had already completed a clear path move, and it's essentially short Ethereum versus Bitcoin back down to these levels. So it completely changes the way you're doing the trades, because now you're looking at relative strength. That's why we're attempting to do things for the channel against just a common currency, to give people the most easily explained, highest reliable patterns. And then if you want to do things versus Bitcoin, or learn this stuff and then put it against the euro or whatever currency you're trading in, that is great. Again, we'll probably go into this more in the future. Just wanted to give an explanation of why we generally chart against the US dollar for everyone. That's what we have for you. Back to you, Bob.
Thanks for that, Mike, and thank you guys for watching. Leave us any comments. We can keep this subject going if it makes sense to you guys to do so. If that was enough of an explanation, then that's fine. We're done with it, but leave us a comment. You can also find us at pathtradingpartners.com. You can hit us in our support email there, support@pathtradingpartners.com. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Hit like, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We would appreciate that. And thanks for helping us grow this channel. Cheers, guys.